Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanyavani Paschatya Jaya Sri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare
Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Navasesha Sunyavadi Paskapti Devi Satarade Sri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Viradha Siddhasari Om Ganatamilandasya Jana Jana Salakaya Chaksus Militan Jaina Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Caitanya Manovistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Sayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sapadantikam Mansakopa Tubascha Kripa Sindhuve Bacha Patitanam Pabhinebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Hare Krishna. Welcome. Continuing reading about Madhavendra Puri's great desire to please Gopal, and Gopal had requested him to get some sandalwood from Jagannath Puri. And going there, he stopped at Ramuna and had an amazing experience with Gopinath, where Gopinath had stolen, and those were the words of the pujari. Gopinath didn't admit that, he just hid it behind the curtain, because the point could be made, it was offered to him, so you couldn't be called stealing, because it was his. But from the pujari's point of view, he was taking it, and Gopinath had taken it back. So when Madhavendra Puri was found in the marketplace, and Gopinath in a dream had even told the pujari the name of the great sannyasi Madhavendra Puri. So he went to the marketplace, the pujari went to the marketplace and called out for Madhavendra Puri so he could give him this kheer, this sweet rice. So Madhavendra Puri took it with incredible relish, and Madhavendra Puri then did the following. He broke up the pot into many, many, many pieces, and he tied it in his cloth, and every day he would eat one piece of that pot and go into great ecstasy. So, having broken the pot and bound the pieces in his cloth, Madhavendra Puri began to think, the Lord has given me a pot of sweet rice. He also didn't accuse the Lord of stealing it. He's given me a pot of sweet rice. And when the people hear of this tomorrow morning, there will be great crowds. Now, how would they hear about it? What do you think?
Maybe the Pujari would tell people.
He's the only one who knew. So why would the Pujari tell? Is because it's so amazing what Gopinath had done. And naturally, when you're witness to something amazing, and he was a direct participant in it, and actually you want to tell everyone not to show how great he is, but to show how wonderful and great his Lord, Sri Gopinath, is. So Madhavendra Puri, knowing that this was going to happen, he left Ramuna before morning. He offered his obeisances to Gopinath before he left, and then he just left. And he left for Jagannath Puri. Now, how do you think he got to Jagannath Puri, Brajmohan?
Walking.
Yes, he walked and walked. It wasn't that far, but it was much further than you'd like to walk, probably. He was walking and walking, and Madhavendra Puri finally reached Jagannath Puri, which is also known as Nalachala. What does Nalachala mean? Mountain. And there's no mountain there, so I'm not sure. Maybe the temple looks like a blue mountain. Do you know why it's called Nalachala? There, in Jagannath Puri, he saw Lord Jagannath, and he was overwhelmed with loving ecstasy. So when these great devotees, and this happened when Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu and perhaps others even saw Lord Jagannath, Mahaprabhu would see Lord Jagannath as Shyamasundar, as Krishna, and then he would go into the most amazing ecstasy. He would see them as Krishna in Kurukshetra, and he would go into ecstasy. He would see Jagannath Baladev and Subhadra Devi in that way. And it wasn't an intellectual experience for him. It wasn't an experience of, I'm supposed to see like this. But this is due to the love that these, of course, Mahaprabhu was Krishna himself, but when one's love of the deity is reflected back, when it's reflected back, one's own love is reflected back, because then Krishna reveals himself as much in accordance with how much love one has. Yayatam mam papadyante. Krishna, he can reveal unlimited beauty, unlimited pastimes. And if someone has unlimited loving consciousness, this is how that person will see. If he has, what to speak of faith, if he has that type of loving consciousness, this is how the person will see. Krishna will manifest himself fully in the consciousness. The deity will manifest himself fully in the consciousness of that person. So quite wonderful. And yet another person will go and just see some statue of some sort and think the statue is not very wonderful. So this is so wonderful, how Krishna is so kind, and he will give us the exact vision that reflects from our own consciousness, so that reaffirms our thoughts, because we'll see according to our thoughts. Yes. What do you think about that? That we see according to our thoughts, not that we don't see the table, but how we view that table will be according to our own thoughts. It's not that this is illusion, but how we view it. What concepts, according to our concepts, will perceive it in one way or another. So when one's eyes are smeared with love, one will see the deity, see the Dham, see the Bhagavatam, see the holy names, and see the devotees in one way. And if one has envy or a different quality born of ignorance covering one's consciousness, one will see in a completely different way. So what do you think about that? What do you think?
We see according to our consciousness. So one object might appear differently to...
Yes, but what do you think about that when you hear that point?
So it's better to have the original consciousness so that you can look at the true picture of the object.
So we want to have our consciousness very subtle and pure, and not add layers and layers and layers of the modes of material nature upon our consciousness and preconceived ideas. And then we'll be able to see reality as it is. And when we see reality as it is, we'll see Krishna everywhere. Premanjana Churita Bhakti Velocha Shanta Sadaiva Hridayeshu Velokyanti. Seeing Krishna everywhere. Because Krishna is everywhere, because there's nothing different from him. But it's so interesting how when Uddhav went to Vrindavan and when Krishna himself was at Kurukshetra, he started preaching this philosophy, that this philosophical point that everything is me, and therefore when you see things, just remember me. Whatever you see, just remember me. So both times when Uddhava was in Vrindavan and when Krishna saw the gopis in Kurukshetra, the gopis thought, oh, why is he giving us philosophy? We don't want philosophy. We don't want to figure out how to see him everywhere. This isn't our problem. How can I find Krishna when he's not present? That's not our problem. Our problem is that he's not here. So the way to solve the problem isn't by some philosophical juxtaposition of concepts, but the way we want to solve this problem is that Krishna, you should come back to Vrindavan. They weren't satisfied just with a philosophical understanding. They just simply wanted Krishna because they had such love for him in a particular way. But yet, because the philosophy is also true, when they look at some object and they see it, especially the Braja Gopikas would wander in Vrindavan and they would see places where they had pastimes with Krishna. They would go to the Yamuna and they would see Dwadasa Ditya Til. Have you been there? Right next to Madan Mohan Temple. Have you been there? It's right there. That's where Mahaprabhu's Bhajan Kutir is, basically. Where Krishna, after being in the water with Kaliya for a long time, he went on top of this hill and the sun manifested Dwadasa. What does Dwadasa mean?
Dwadasi, it comes after the Ekadashi.
But that's not what it means. Not Dwadasa means 12. The 12th day Ekadashi is the 11th day. So 12 suns manifested to keep Krishna warm. So Mahaprabhu had his, Sanatana Goswami had his Bhajan Kutir there. So wherever the gopis would go, they would see things that reminded them, places that reminded them of Krishna. So, and then they would feel separation from Krishna. When they felt separation from Krishna, it was like a channel would open up to the uppercut manifestation where Krishna is always present in Vrindavan, and therefore they would actually see Krishna by virtue of not a philosophical point, but their love of Krishna in separation. And this is actually the teachings of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. So when Sri Madhavendra Puri saw Lord Jagannath, he was overwhelmed with loving ecstasy. So what does that mean, to be overwhelmed with ecstasy? And just imagine you're an ordinary yatri, an ordinary pilgrim, and you go to see Lord Jagannath, and you're just looking at Lord Jagannath, and according to your advancement, you're saying, oh, he's very beautiful, this, that. And then just imagine if the person next to you was in this mood. When Madhavendra Puri was overwhelmed in the ecstasy of love of Godhead, he sometimes stood up, and sometimes he fell to the ground. Sometimes he laughed, he danced, and he sang. In this way, he enjoyed transcendental bliss by seeing the Jagannath deity. So if we saw someone who was like that, there could be many reactions according to our consciousness. One is this person. One could think that this person is just faking and a cheater, and people do fake and cheat in this way, so they could be known as great devotees. But if someone was in that mood, his heart overflowing in ecstasy and love for Krishna, just seeing Krishna and feeling separation from Krishna and wanting to be with Krishna, and he was laughing and dancing and singing, and there would be such a mood that person in his ecstasy would create, and that mood would be like a big, big, big wave, and it would wash us to the shore of our material consciousness and pull us out into a different realm of ecstasy. And this is how Mahaprabhu, when he was traveling in South India, this was one of his main preaching strategies. You can call it a preaching strategy, but when he would travel, he would go to temples, and he would be in complete ecstasy and chant and dance, and tears would be flowing from his eyes. And he would laugh and he would cry, and the people in South India were just amazed. They had never seen anything like this before, and they became so-called converted to Krishna consciousness, to Mahaprabhu's movement of chanting Krishna's holy names. And that was one of his preaching methods as he traveled. Do you know what the other one was that's mentioned? You don't know. Do you know?
Discussion?
He did do that, but not very often. He did that with the Buddhists. He did that with some of the members of the Ramanuja Sampradaya. And he did that with the Madhvas. But it was his great beauty. His beauty was so amazing, with his saffron coif and he just looked so beautiful. Everyone was attracted. His beauty was out of this world. Literally, it wasn't from this world. So he had preaching strategies that not all of us can imitate. So he laughed, he danced, he sang, he fell to the ground, he stood up. But Jagannath Darshan Mahasukha, he was able to experience such great happiness just by seeing Lord Jagannath. And I had the experience myself of one day I was in Jagannath Puri, and I was outside the temple in front of the Singadwara, and there was one shopkeeper nearby, and he said, of course, shopkeepers, what do they want? They want you to come into their shop, and after you come into their shop, they're hoping you'll be interested in something. So he said to me, how are you? And I said, oh, not very good. And then he said, why? And I said, oh, because I cannot go see Lord Jagannath. So I wasn't being real serious or anything like that. I was just saying that, just talking. So he said, "Oh, you can see Lord Jagannath." I thought, "I can? How?" I thought, but I didn't say that. And I said, "How?" And he said, "Come up here, I'll show you." So I stepped up onto his shop, which was a little elevated, and it was on the side. If you're facing the Singadwar, it was to the left. It was a shop. And then he showed me that from the corner of his shop, you could see Petit Pavan Jagannath. So I could see this is what he would do all the time. He would look at Lord Jagannath. And then I thought, oh, wait a second. I thought he was going to show me Lord Jagannath, and he showed me inside, but he showed me Petit Pavan Jagannath outside. And then immediately I understood that I have seen Lord Jagannath so many times. In the Melbourne temple, in this temple, in that temple, and here in Gopinath Dham, and even in China, so many of the devotees have Lord Jagannath. But usually when I see Lord Jagannath, my mind is 1,000 miles away. So even if I went in front of Lord Jagannath in his temple in Jagannath Puri, I probably wouldn't be able to see Lord Jagannath because of my wandering mind. I could be standing right in front of him and not see him at all. And then I took the ability to see Petit Pavan Jagannath very, very seriously. And then I've always, when I would walk past the Jagannath temple, I would see Petit Pavan Jagannath, and so many people would do the same thing. They'd take off their shoes and stand and offer some prayers, so I would also do that. And it was so satisfying, and he's so nice, he's so wonderful actually. And he reciprocates with our consciousness. So what do you think about that point?
Sometimes even, I think a lot of the times, even if you can't actually see Jagannath in the temple, then seeing another Jagannath can be so much more powerful.
But what do you think about the point that Jagannath or any deity will reciprocate with your consciousness? What do you think about that point? What do you think?
He is absolute.
That's a philosophical reflection. What do you think?
It's a good experience, actually. I'd like to experience that, but never experienced. But
what comes to your mind? What comes to your mind?
Me?
Okay, yes.
That's what it says in Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, Tom. Okay, what do you think?
If he reciprocates with my consciousness,
yes.
No wonder I can't see him.
I thought someone would say, perhaps I should improve my consciousness. Which is basically what you said indirectly. So, when Madhavendra Puri came to Jagannath Puri, now here it's reflecting back. Now, why did Lord Jagannath? Why did Madhavendra Puri immediately leave Ramuna?
Because everyone will come to him.
Yeah, and you're the great Madhavendra Puri, Asavad, and please give me blessings, touch his feet. And so Madhavendra Puri came to Jagannath Puri. When he came, people were aware of his transcendental reputation. They knew that this great devotee Madhavendra Puri had come. Therefore, crowds of people came and offered him all sorts of respect and devotion. Even though one may not like it, reputation, as ordained by providence, comes to him. Indeed, one's transcendental reputation is known throughout the entire world. Being afraid of his reputation, pratishta, being afraid of wanting to be known as a great devotee. There's one thing to be a great devotee and people knowing that you're a great devotee, but there's another thing, it's a completely different thing when you desire to be known as a great devotee. That's called pratishta. And that desire for pratishta, or to be known as a great devotee, is upasakagan. It's a weed around that can choke our devotional kripa and inhibit its ability to grow and give its fruit of love of God at the lotus feet of Krishna. So being afraid of his reputation, pratishta, being afraid of pratishta, wanting that, Madhavendra Puri fled from Ramuna. But the reputation brought by love of Godhead is so sublime that it goes along with the devotee as if following him. So Madhavendra Puri had no desire for that to be for any. When he served Krishna, there was no desire other than to please Krishna. Such purity is wonderful, and that purity is required to achieve love for Krishna. Srila Jiva Goswami explains this in Bhakti Sandarbha, that if we, for us to get, for the kriti sadhya bhavet sadhanadabi nitya sadasya bhavasya prakatnam riddhi sadhyata, for the sadhana to give the sadhya, or the goal of bhava bhakti, or love for Krishna, then one has to practice pure devotional service. Anyabhilasita sunyam, not mixed devotional service. Not devotional service mixed with other desires, other abhilas. But Madhavendra Puri's purity of heart was so glorious that his reputation was also large, huge, and it followed him, even though he had no desire for it. So here's Prabhupada's purport. Almost all the conditioned souls within the material world are envious. Jealous people generally turn against one who automatically attains some reputation. This is natural for jealous people. Consequently, when a devotee is fit to receive worldly reputation, he is envied by many people. This is quite natural, not pleasant, but natural. When a person out of humility does not desire fame, people generally think him quite humble and consequently give him all kinds of fame. Actually, a Vaishnava does not hanker after fame or a great reputation. Madhavendra Puri, the king of Vaishnavas, bore his reputation, meaning that he carried his reputation. He couldn't avoid it. He tried to avoid having a reputation as a great devotee, and therefore he left Ramuna, but he couldn't avoid it because his reputation followed him. He bore his reputation, but he wanted to keep himself outside of the vision of the general populace. He wanted to cover his real identity as a great devotee of the Lord, but when people saw him overwhelmed in the ecstasy of love of Godhead, they naturally gave credit to him. So it wasn't that he was putting on a show, but it was uncontrollable for him when he saw Lord Jagannath. It was out of his control. It was natural for him to cry, to fall to the ground, tears running, to stand up, to laugh, to dance. So they gave credit to him. Oh, here's a great devotee. Actually, a first-class reputation is due Madhavendra Puri because he was a most confidential devotee of the Lord. Now, how do we know that he was a confidential devotee of the Lord? We saw what he did when he naturally did, when he stood in front of Lord Jagannath, but how else do we know that he was such a confidential devotee of the Lord? What do you think?
Because the Lord hid the kheer
For him. You also don't want to accuse him of stealing. How about when he steals butter? Makunjor, are we allowed to say that? Or maybe he only hid the clothes of the gopis. He didn't steal them, maybe. He's the most confidential because the Lord came to him when he was in Vrindavan. Gopal came to him and said that, he said, I've been observing you for so long and wondering when will you come to serve me. His devotion was so great, the Lord himself wanted to taste the sweetness of that love. And he came to him in a dream and he wanted him. He especially asked him to do service. He asked him to install him in the temple. And he asked him to get sandalwood for him. And then, as you mentioned, he hid the kheer for him. So he's a most confidential devotee of the Lord. Sometimes a sahajiya presents himself as being void of desire for reputation, pratishtha, in order to become famous as a humble man. So everything can be imitated and used exactly against the purpose that it is made. Everything can be imitated and used selfishly, and rather than kirtan, for example, being used selfishly, this is for my pleasure, rather it should be used for Krishna's pleasure. So humility is the natural consciousness of a soul who is in relationship with Krishna, natural consciousness. So one can imitate that and not be in relationship to Krishna, but imitate it to get something for oneself, to be known as a humble devotee. So how do you think Krishna deals with a person like that? Say if one is a devotee but has the desire in his heart for people to think he's humble so that they'll think he's a greater devotee. How do you think Krishna deals with that? In some way or another. He has his own way of dealing with individuals. But what we know for sure is that such people, as Prabhupada ends his purport by saying, cannot actually attain the platform of celebrated Vaishnavas. In other words, a great devotee like Madhavendra Puri, who is humble, and humility and prema are required. To get to be on the platform of prema bhakti, one must be humble. And the only way one can really be humble is really be on the platform of prema bhakti. So one who is a celebrated devotee, who is actually on the platform of great humility and great devotion, he has love for Krishna. But someone who's imitating doesn't get that most cherished and wonderful of things of prema. So how Krishna will deal with such a soul, such a devotee, is up to Krishna. You don't see it as much nowadays, but in the earlier days in Vrindavan, maybe it still happens around in Navadvip or something, but when the devotees would be doing kirtan somewhere in Vrindavan, then there would be some Bengali Vaishnavas who'd come and roll on the ground. And And we learned to just ignore them, basically, then they stop. Because there's a tendency to want to be known as great. But that to be known as great is different from being great. So which is it better, to be known as great or to be great? Yeah. I remember Braja Bihari Prabhu telling me that, because he works in the field of mediation, that means there's two parties, and when they're fighting and try to get them to come to a peaceful settlement. So he said there's two kinds of mediators. Those who want to be known as mediators, good mediators, and those who are successful at being mediators. In other words, you can't have false ego and be successful in this job. You have to always give the credit to the people who you're trying to mediate between and appreciate their sincerity. But if you want to be known and get some prestige out of it, then you won't be successful. Same thing in devotional service. If we want to be known as a great devotee or be worshipped as a Labha Puja Pratishtadi Jata Upasakagan, these are all weeds around our devotional service. So the only cure for this is to remain always a humble servant of Guru and Vaishnavas and Krishna in that way, in Mahaprabhu. Always don't move from the identity, somehow don't move from the entity of being a servant, insignificant servant. What do you think about that, Braj Mohan?
I guess that there are different platforms, and so I guess at the beginning, first people would rather everyone think that they are something, but then they realize that even if everyone thinks that you're amazing, then that's still much lower, and it's definitely not as wonderful as actually it being like that.
Being amazing. Yeah. But why do people want to be known as amazing as opposed to being amazing? What do you think? But I know the answer I'm thinking of anyway, because it's a lot easier to be known as amazing than actually be amazing. It takes so much more, especially in devotional service, it takes so much sincerity, and it takes so much mercy, and it takes so much attempt, and so much heartbreak in the sense of one has to confront one's insincerity. When one wants to be sincere, the first thing one finds out is how insincere one is. Do you keep your room neat and clean?
Yeah.
Shiva, you're going to tell on him? Is his room usually neat and clean? Kind of, sometimes, usually. That's okay. But say if your room was always dark, and you can, in your mind, you can think, oh, it's probably quite clean. But the first thing you have to do if you really want it to be clean is turn on the light. And then you can see, oh no, I was imagining it was clean, but actually it was, everything was misplaced, and yeah, and it's not so clean. So before you can really have a clean room, you have to confront that it's not clean. And then you have to do the hard work of cleaning it. So to be really sincere, you have to confront your own insincerity, and then do the hard work of cleaning it, which is good chanting and all the sadhana practices and humility and like that. Clear? It's one thing to understand, though, and another thing to do it, yes? Okay, text 148. Madhavendra Puri wanted to leave Jagannath Puri because people were honoring him as a great devotee. But he left Ramuna immediately before the sun came out, even before the sun rose in the morning, because he didn't want people honoring him. But why couldn't he do that in Jagannath Puri? It's because he had service to do. So that was the most important thing for him. Because it's one thing to be a devotee, but what it means to be a devotee is you have to serve. You have to serve. So if Gopal himself asked him to bring sandalwood from Jagannath Puri, how fortunate was Madhavendra Puri to have a direct instruction from Gopal to do that. So he was there for one purpose, and that purpose was to get the sandalwood. And for him, it was an austerity that people honored him, but he did something very, very good with that honor. He used it in the service of Gopal. So Madhavendra Puri told all the servants of Lord Jagannath and all the great devotees there the story of the appearance of Sri Gopal. When all the devotees at Jagannath Puri heard that the Gopal deity wanted sandalwood, in great pleasure they all endeavored to collect it because they were devotees. So devotees want to not only to serve Krishna, but they want to help others in their service to Krishna. There's no envy. So if some devotee needs help, and we have the ability to help them in their service to Krishna, then we are very, very fortunate. So those who were acquainted with the government officers met with them, and the government officers, and begged for camphor and sandalwood, which they collected. And Prabhupada explains in his purport that the Malaya Chandan, the Chandan and the camphor that Gopal had wanted, they were used for the deities, for Jagannath deity, for the arti, the camphor, and Chandan for Chandan, to cool the body of the Lord. So these items were under government control. So the devotees from Madhavendra Puri spoke to the officials and asked them who they knew who could help. So those Madhavendra Puri spoke to the devotees, and the devotees spoke to the officials, and they obtained permission to take the sandalwood and camphor outside Jagannath Puri. One brahmana and one servant were given to Madhavendra Puri just to carry the sandalwood. He was also given the necessary traveling expenses. To get past the toll collectors along the way, Madhavendra Puri was supplied with the necessary release papers from government officers. The papers were placed in his hands. In this way, Madhavendra Puri started for Vrindavan with the burden of sandalwood. There's two kinds of burdens. Prabhupada says, not here, but in the Bhagavatam, in one of his purports, there's the burden of love, and then there's the burden of the beast, as he calls it. The burden of the beast is the burden that when, of course, now they don't use donkeys to carry the bricks, and maybe they do. In Vrindavan, the dhobis, the washermen, always would put their clothes on donkeys. And now they use motorcycles. And the donkeys, and also they still use the donkeys to carry bricks, and they put so many bricks on these poor skinny donkeys. Have you ever seen that?
Not the bricks, but I've seen donkeys.
I've seen donkeys. Have you seen them carrying? Have you seen that? It's not very, they suffer. So that's the burden of the beast. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen it, but back in Kenya.
They use donkeys to carry bricks.
Yeah, the rural areas here.
Yeah. The burden of the beast, but there's a different kind of burden. The burden of love, when you do it out of love for another. You do something that you ordinarily wouldn't do. It doesn't give you pleasure directly, but the thought that you're doing it for the pleasure of another gives you pleasure. but it's still a burden. But it's a burden of love. So in this way, Madhavendra Puri started from Vrindavan with the burden of sandalwood. And Katadine, after some days, Ramuna Uttarila Kia. After some days, he reached Ramuna again. He reached the village of Ramuna, and guess what temple he went into? He went into the Gopinath temple. So we'll stop here and find out what he did when he saw Gopinath, because he hadn't seen him since Gopinath had hidden the sweet rice. So now he was seeing Gopinath again. Okay, we shall stop here. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
I thought that when he left Ramuna and went to Puri, the news had already reached Puri, or is it just more subtle than that?
I'm sorry, say it again.
He left Ramuna to go to Puri because he didn't want to be...
Yes, no.
He didn't want people to come to him, but doesn't it mention that the news had already reached Puri before he got there?
It did, but not that news, because that wouldn't have been possible, because there was no internet in those days.
Of course.
But there were two things. One is that, and the main thing was that he was in such ecstasy when he saw Lord Jagannath. Everyone recognized him. So his greatness of being a devotee was the news, but also it seemed like also he was famous. I mean, he would, as described in Caitanya Bhagavat, he would travel with all his disciples all over India. That's when he met Nityananda Prabhu. So he was a well-known, great spiritual teacher.
Not specifically that news.
I couldn't see how, because it's not that far. And that means someone... Horse or donkey. But people wouldn't have done that. There was not enough in it for them to travel with that news. But if someone was traveling, they would have. But it would have taken a few days to gain momentum in Ramuna, and then. So he was a well-known devotee, as far as I can understand. That is clear, and also the ecstasy that he showed made him famous. That's mentioned. Made him famous. But good question. Any other questions or comments? What do you think is going to happen when he sees Gopinath for the first time?
Normally the devotee offers what they have, so he might offer sandalwood to Gopinath.
How could he offer that? It's for Gopal. It's offering, when you offer something, you don't offer what you have if it belongs to someone else, because then it's not your offering. Yes.
And Gopinath told him that he didn't need to take it all the way.
But that's later. Shh, don't tell the end.
Yeah.
Did Madhavendra Puri recognize it was Gopinath's temple again?
Yes. Famous temple. Gopinath temple was famous. Okay. We shall.
He'll eat some cure.
Yeah. The pujari, as soon as he sees him, he'll immediately bring some cure for him.
No, you're the one saying this story.
Hmm?
No, you're the one saying this, telling everyone this story.
Yeah, but everyone, by next week, you must forget. You cannot remember. What will it be that you can't remember?
That he eats.
No, you forgot already.
You forgot already. Everyone knows that you forgot already. What is it that I can't remember? Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Caitanya Caritamrta ki jai. Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Sri Madhavendra Puri ki jai. Sri, who else? Gopinath, Gopal, and all the devotees who assisted Gopinath and Gopal, and Lord Jagannath. Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanand.